Hello, and welcome to another edition of everyone's favorite podcast, Ideological. Today, before you switch channels or watch another video, you're like, well, who's this Leibniz guy? This seems really boring. I don't know who this is. Today, we're going to be learning about Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, and let me tell you why he's a big deal. When you think of the most learned, most intelligent people of all time, this guy is a contender for that. So you might have not heard of him. He hasn't heard of you either, but he's a big deal. The problem is with you if you haven't heard of him. So today we're going to be talking about Leibniz and his philosophy and who is this just powerhouse intellectual figure. And so it should be a ton of fun. Today's episode is brought to you by Cheese Whiz. Cheese Whiz. It's like cheese, but with cancer in it. Okay, so let me tell you why he's a big deal. He is an absolute polymath, okay? He's good at everything. He does history, and he does science, and he does physics, and he does philosophy, and he does theology, and he does, he works as he does law. He works as, like a legal official. He's good at everything. He's a true polyhistor, a true Renaissance man, a true man of letters. And what he's trying to do is three things. And then I'll tell you a little bit about his life, and we will have a ton of fun. By the way, it's morning here, so got a little energy here. I can't tell you what it is because I just have to turn it. You can't know what this is, even though you can tell for legal reasons.
Cut my life into pieces. He's
trying to harmonize a bunch of different groups together. He wants to harmonize Catholics and Protestants. So there's even this thing that he's going to add to his metaphysics to try to make a case for Catholic communion, even though he's a Protestant, because he's trying to bring them together. He's trying to fit the new science that's going on during the Enlightenment with some traditional metaphysics. And he's trying to give an answer to Spinoza's monism and Descartes' dualism. What does that mean? We will get into it. It's going to be a ton of fun. Ideological. Are you ready? Are you ready to be less dumb? Let's do it. Who is Leibniz? I'll say it in that little Germany way. He was born in July of 1646 in Leipzig, Germany. His dad was a professor of moral philosophy at the University of Leipzig. So he already has a very smart dad that can teach him. I do this as a philosopher with my kids. They'll say something and I'm like, well, wait a second. If you hold this, then you also have to hold this, and you can't hold that, so you don't hold that. And they're like, I just want some Cheetos or whatever. So he taught himself Latin at the age of 7.
It's my last resort. Suffocation. No.
Remember, he's better than you. People in the past were not dumber than us. They're less technological, but they're smarter. At the age of 8, he was allowed to use his father's library, where he read. At 8, he's reading the classical authors. He's reading the church fathers. He's reading the scholastics at 8, after he taught himself Latin at the age of 7. Why is Leibniz also a big deal? He invented calculus. It's probably better to say he discovered calculus, right? It's Benjamin Franklin didn't invent lightning, although I always say that. He discovered some things about it with kites, I guess. I don't know. In 1675, he discovered differential calculus independently of Isaac Newton. So you've got these powerhouses. You've got Leibniz and you've got Newton, and they both discover calculus independently of one another. What an age of intelligence. So they discover calculus, differential calculus, separately from one another, and then they fight the rest of their lives really over who invented it first. And who did somebody plagiarize the other one or what it might be. Newton was awarded the credit, although scholars today generally, the consensus is that they did discover it independently of each other. They didn't rip each other off. But Isaac Newton was kind of given the credit, although Leibniz came up with it without Newton. And Leibniz's version is the one that was more accurate. It's the one closer to what we use today. So being the better inventor, his notation's closer to what we use today. He got to meet Peter the Great. He was elected a member of the Royal Society in England. He also founded and was the first president of the Prussian Academy of Sciences. He knew a bunch of languages. What he wrote in what he wrote in Latin, German, and French. His most famous and influential philosophical works were written in French. He put a lot of energy into creating a universal philosophical language to replace natural language so everyone could communicate. Again, when I say he's incredible, I am not over-exaggerating. He is the man. Whether you love him or hate him, he is an absolute genius, like absolute, literal, off the charts genius. The idea was maybe we could come up with a perfect philosophical language. Wittgenstein and Russell would toy with this idea later, only to find that they couldn't do it. But maybe we could find a universal philosophical language that would solve confusion and help people communicate. He influenced philosophers as diverse as Bertrand Russell and Martin Heidegger. He seems to have been a pretty faithful Lutheran from his theological writings, although he refused communion on his deathbed and he didn't regularly attend church. So he's generally considered, though, to be Lutheran, so he's a Protestant. He died, unfortunately. He is not immortal. He died on November 14th, 1716 in Hanover in Germany. Okay, let me give you two fantastic quotes by Dennis Diderot, right? The major and the biggest contributor, probably, there's a bunch of contributors, to the Encyclopédie, the Enlightenment encyclopedia that comes out of France that tries to classify like all human knowledge. So Diderot is a genius, and here is what he says about Leibniz. Okay, listen to these quotes. Remember, also, Leibniz is a theist and Diderot is an atheist, so he doesn't even care. He's like, Leibniz is a genius. Listen to what he says. He says this: "Perhaps never has a man read as much, studied as much, meditated more, and written more than Leibniz. What he has composed on the world, God, nature, and the soul is of the most sublime eloquence. If his ideas had been expressed with the flair of Plato, the philosopher of Leipzig," that's Leibniz, "would cede nothing to the philosopher of Athens." Oh, man, what the actual, that's incredible, all right? When he's like, yeah, he's like Plato. But he's got another one, an even better quote. This is also from Diderot about Leibniz. He says this: "When one compares the talents one has with those of Leibniz, one is tempted to throw away one's books and go die quietly in the dark of some forgotten corner." Cheers to that.
It's my last resort. Suffocate.
Diderot's a genius, and he's like, Leibniz is so smart that when you read him, you should just go kill yourself. I mean, it's amazing, all right? Okay. What did Leibniz believe? Why is he a big deal? Let's go over a few major ideas in his thought. The first one is his view of metaphysics and what are called monads. Gross. Monads sounds like you're going to kick somebody in the monads. Let me tell you what he's trying to do. There is a problem in philosophy that's bedeviled philosophers forever. And it's the question of, one, of what is everything made? And two, how can different substances interact? These are metaphysical questions. Meaning, if you say, for example, Zach, I think everything is made of matter, I'll say, cool. What about a vacuum? What about empty space? Is that made of matter? What about the concept of a triangle? I don't mean an actual triangle that you see like a yield sign. The concept of a triangle, is that made of matter? What about time? Is time made of matter? Is time a thing that exists, like Newton would say? There's all these kind of things, propositions. There's all these things that seem to exist that are not made of matter. Cool. The other problem is, how can different things interact like this? So think back to our friend, Casper the Friendly Ghost, okay? With Casper the Friendly Ghost, we believe he can walk through walls. We don't really believe in the ghost, but just follow me with this analogy here. We believe that he can walk through walls. Why? Because he's immaterial. The wall is material. Casper's immaterial, so he can, go through the wall because they're different substances. Well, the question is, how can different substances interact? How can your mind and your thoughts, which seem to be immaterial, for example, move your hand, which is material? And so this is a problem that philosophers are trying to deal with. Now, there's several different solutions. One is the solution of someone like Spinoza, who just says everything is the same substance. He's a monist. Everything is God or nature, so now things can interact. Problem solved. There are others, though, like Descartes, that are going to say, no, there's really two substances. There's there's mind, what's immaterial, and its essence is thinking. And then there's, what's physical. Its essence is extension. But he doesn't really know how to solve the problem of how they can interact, right? So think about when you feel pain. The pain and the experience of subjective pain is different than the brain chemistry going on in your mind. Like if you burn your hand, you feel it in your hand, even though the chemicals are going on in your brain. That's not the same. Anyway, Leibniz is going to come up with a solution to that. And here is his solution. Okay. So there's major ideas. I'm going to give you two of them together. Monads and metaphysics, and then what is called pre-established harmony. Here is Leibniz's idea. Follow me because this is a little technical. For Leibniz, everything is made up of what are called monads. I'll describe those in a second. They're all technically, though, different substances, and they don't interact. What they do is they follow their own path that God has pre-programmed into them, what's called pre-established harmony or intellechy. They have these purposes within them. And though it looks like when you hit a billiard ball and it hits another billiard ball, it looks like it's just hitting it. What's really happening is the billiard ball monads are going here, and then the billiard ball monads here are going, but they are separate monads and separate collections of monads. What does that mean? Let's back up. Again, this is very strange, and it seems very not common sense. It seems very counterintuitive. First of all, they're called monads, which again is hilarious because of the Greek word monos, which means one. What Leibniz is trying to say is he's trying to say what makes something a substance is its unity. So monads are immaterial, soul-like entities that stand in relation to all the other monads in the universe, but they don't causally interact. The only monad that interacts on other ones is God, who's like a super monad. Okay, this is so confusing. Let me give you a weird illustration that's not perfect. None of these are going to be perfect illustrations because nothing's like monads. But let me follow me. Imagine that everything is made up of, let's call it tiny metal spheres or tiny spheres that are mirrored, okay? Those spheres all over the universe would stand in relation to one another, and because they have a shiny surface, they would be reflected in all the other monads, all the other shiny spheres. So if you had a bunch of mirrors, they would all reflect and see each other, and some of them would be super far away, but some of them would be close. But technically, if you could analyze any one of them, you could know everything else about the universe because it stands in relation to everything else. Now, you can't know everything about a monad. Only God can do that, but to Leibniz. But if you could, because it is one big system, you could technically know everything about the universe. So God is at the top. He's the super monad because he sees everything perfectly clearly. Humans are below that. And why? Because we have reason and we have self-consciousness. We can say I, as Leibniz would say. But our perception of the world is way more confused, obviously, than God's is. And our soul is like a dominant monad over the rest of the monads in our body. Then there are bare monads, which are basically everything else. Right? My phone has bare monads, and this microphone has bare monads, and this shirt has bare monads, whatever it is. They don't reason like we do. Don't think that everything is like a little human. That's not what he's saying. But he does think that monads have perception and appetite. What does that mean? It means that they stand in relation to everything else in the universe. And by appetite, it doesn't mean they're hungry.
Suffocation, no breathing, don't give a
or thirsty. What it means is that they are self-moved. Oh, nerd stuff. Let's stuff Leibniz in a locker. Let me say it way simpler. If two people get into a fight, they're causally, in our mind, they're causally interacting. This is not Leibniz, but just follow me with this example. It's a crass example and crude, but I think it's really helpful. If I get into a fight, someone throws a punch and I see it and I react and I block, and then I throw a punch and they see it and they block, and we're causally interacting with each other. What Leibniz thinks is more likely the case of what's going on with everything in the universe is this. Imagine that there is a movie someone's producing. He wouldn't use this example because they didn't have movies. But you're trying to get two robots to fight. As you are having these two robots fight, are they actually fighting? Like, are they remembering their robot kung fu training? So one robot tries to karate chop and the other one sees it and blocks it, and then the other one throws a punch and it sees it and blocks it? No. What happens are these programmers pre-program into the robots the sequence that they're supposed to do. They're not actually reacting to the other one. They're just following their own internal mechanism. So this one at second 3 throws a punch. This one at second 4 blocks a punch. This one at second 5 in the video ducks. This one at second 6 throws a punch over his head. But they're different from each other. They already have pre-programmed into them everything that they're going to do in the fight sequence. They're not actually remembering their kung fu training and fighting. Now, what if everything in the universe was like that? What if everything, God just pre-programmed in everything that is, what it would do, and it looks like it's causing these effects on other things, but really it's following its own sequence that's pre-programmed into it, pre-established harmony, and that is in harmony with everything else that also has its entire history pre-programmed into it. That is the idea of Leibniz. He thinks that for every subject, something of which you can say something, all of its predicates are already built into it, right? So little baby Hitler is going to be this terrible dictator. That's already pregnant in him. It's going to happen. And he's not being affected by other monads. That is just the pre-programmed thing that is in him, and that is going to happen. Well, Zach, what if Hitler didn't become a terrible dictator? Well, then it wouldn't be Hitler. It would be somebody else. So anyway, let me give you some quotes that might make this helpful. He says this. This is from Discourse on Metaphysics. Each substance is like a whole world and like a mirror of God, or indeed of the whole universe, which each substance expresses in its own fashion. Rather, as the same town looks different according to the position from which it is viewed. In a way, then, the universe is multiplied as many times as there are substances, and in the same way, the glory of God is magnified by so many quite different representations of his work, it can even be said that each substance carries within it, in a certain way, the imprint of God's infinite wisdom and omnipotence, and imitates him as far as it can. Okay? This is a very strange way of thinking of the world. Essentially, what Leibniz is trying to say is this. Everything that we think that looks physical, he toys with Aristotelian views of substance in his middle period, but then eventually he moves to a fuller view of idealism. We'll talk about that in another lecture. Okay, clear your mind. That's too much. Let's back up. For Leibniz, everything is not made of what is physical. That's how it appears to us. That's just the appearance. That's the phenomena. But it's actually made up of things that are immaterial. Why, Zach? Why can't it be made up of matter? It makes more sense to say things are made up of matter because matter has extension, which means that everything is just an aggregate. So my phone is just, if it's just material, it's just made up of an aggregate of things. It's a group of things. It's not a single individual thing, which is what he wants with a monad. He thinks a substance has to be its own singular thing. Everything that's physical has extension, meaning you can cut it and cut it and cut it and cut it, which is why to Leibniz, the idea of an atom, a physical atom, makes no sense. The word atom, by the way, atomos, it means uncuttable in Greek. He would say that makes no sense. Even an atom, if it's matter, could still, at least in your mind, be cut, even if we don't have the tools to do it. An atom's made of 2 half atoms, and a half atom is made up of 2 quarter atoms, and you could cut it forever. If you could cut material forever, there is no smallest thing, and talking about matter like that doesn't make sense. You need something that is not material, that stands behind that, and that is what monads are. Now, that sounds really, really strange, but it's actually really genius, and let me tell you why. He solves for the problem of what everything is made of, or of what is everything made. He solves the problem of how things can interact. He gives a proof for the existence of God. He gives a proof for the existence of soul, which is what he wants to do in his philosophy. Other philosophers obviously don't care about that. And he has a system that works. So it's very hard to disprove his system, even though it seems very strange, okay? So that is the idea of monads, his metaphysics, and then intellechy, this pre-established harmony. He has a famous phrase where he says that monads are windowless. What he means is that they don't share attributes. It's not like they have open windows and some of their accidents or properties go out and flow into another monad and vice versa. Everything is within its own little compact monad, and they do their own thing. God is the only monad that causally acts on others by conserving them. Let me give you a quote, and then we are going to get into some things that are a little easier. That's the hardest part. So you've made it. Go reward yourself, go get you a Cadbury cream egg, which I've heard in England that they have all year round, and we don't. We didn't fight them to not have this. So we should have it all year round. Let me give you a quote from Discourse on Metaphysics. God produces various substances according to the different views he has of the universe. And through God's intervention, the proper nature of each substance brings it about that what happens to one corresponds with what happens to all the others, without their acting upon one another directly. Okay, number 3. A subject is always pregnant. A subject is always pregnant with all of its predicates. If you could know the predicates, that's just anything you say about something is a predicate. You're predicating it. If you could fully know all the predicates of any monad, you could know everything in the entire universe. Okay? Caesar crossing the Rubicon is already within the monad of Caesar. He hasn't expressed it yet, but he's going to. Okay? He says this in the philosophical essays: every individual substance contains in its perfect notion the entire universe. Not distinctly, right? So God knows all the things, but some bare monad in a table doesn't know anything. It just stands far away and confused in relation to the rest of the universe, but it is somehow still reflected in the entire universe. He says in the Monadology, one of his most popular works, and since every present state of a simple substance is a natural consequence of its preceding state, the present is pregnant with the future. That's where I get that phrase. I'll give you one more quote on this, and then we'll go to some things that are a little bit easier to understand. He says in Discourse on Metaphysics, "This agrees with my principles. For nothing ever enters into our mind naturally from the outside, and we have a bad habit of thinking of our souls as if it receives certain species as messengers and as if it has doors and windows." Okay, that's the idea of it being windowless. Everything is contained in the monad. It doesn't share attributes with other monads going in and out. Okay, pat yourself on the back. You've made it through his crazy, difficult to understand, but also really brilliant system. Whether you love it or hate it, it's not dumb. It solves a lot of problems, even though it's very weird and it creates its own problems. We'll see some of the problems at the end. Okay, another major philosophical point for Leibniz. He believes in innate ideas. So there's a debate going on at this time between what are called the rationalists and the empiricists. Okay, the rationalists are guys like Descartes and Spinoza and Leibniz, and then the empiricists are guys like Hume and Locke and Berkeley. And one of the big things they're trying to debate is whether or not we have innate ideas. Of everything we know, does that all come from the outside in? Are we a tabula rasa, like Locke would say, where we're like this blank slate, and everything we learn through experience. We learn through our senses. We learn through sense perception. Someone like Leibniz is going to say, no, we have ideas within us that God has placed there. All right. So for somebody like Plato, your soul's eternal, you saw the forms, and then when you were a human, you remembered all those things. Well, Leibniz considers himself to be a Christian, so he's going to say that, like Augustine did, that God creates. When he creates you, he has certain things already implanted in your mind that you didn't experience. So think about how interesting that is for a second. Of everything that you know, did you learn it all from experience? Or are there certain things within you that you were born with that are actual pieces of knowledge? And so he believes that you're born with actual pieces of knowledge. He's a true rationalist. And he believes that experience unlocks them. He's not saying that you can go to a 2-day-old baby and somehow the baby actually knows that 2 + 2 is 4. That's not what he's saying. He's saying those mathematical concepts and stuff are already there. They're unlocked throughout life, but you didn't learn them through life. So here's a few examples he gives of things that he thinks are innate. All right? These are things you didn't experience, and yet you somehow know. Being. You don't experience being. You experience beings, individual things, but being. Substance. So this can of nameless, non-name brand Red Bull, just kidding, there it is. I don't actually experience the substance of this can. I experience shininess and kind of solidity and kind of a metal feel. I don't actually get the substance of Red Bull canness. So where do I get that idea? Well, it's already in me. The idea of action, the idea of identity, the idea of mathematical truths, right? That you can go, there's a famous example in history of, this is in the ancient Greek world, of a guy that goes to an uneducated slave who doesn't know anything about math and teaches him a few things about math, and then the slave can do all kinds of mathematical propositions. How can he do that? If you know that 2 + 2 is 4, you can then say, well, then 3 + 2 is 5. You didn't learn that second thing. You learned the first, and somehow all the rest of the rules were already in you, according to Leibniz. The idea of infinity. You don't experience anything infinite, yet there's this concept of infinity, right? Necessary truths, that something cannot both be and not be at the same time. That's not something that you experience. That's something that you see that is obviously logically like an axiom that's true. The soul, he thinks you have a soul and that you know that because you can say I, you have a self, and others, okay? So he does believe that we need our senses to bring out the innate things in us, but that they are in there. And he uses a great example. They're like veins in a marble. Like if a sculptor is going to sculpt something out of marble, there's already kind of some veins in the marble, like some, lines and shapes and stuff. And that's what he thinks is going on in our mind. You still need the sculptor to knock off those other pieces. You still have to have this experience to unlock him, but those veins, if you will, are already there. He says in New Essays on Human Understanding this, listen to this. From this, it appears that necessary truths, such as we find in pure mathematics, and particularly in arithmetic and geometry, must have principles whose proof doesn't depend on instances, or, therefore, on the testimony of the senses, even though without the senses, it would never occur to us to think of them, okay? So the senses kind of trigger this and help us find what's inside of us. He also says in the same thing, New Essays on Human Understanding, I deem all necessary truths to be innate. Okay? So he holds to monads. Think of monads as mental atoms. Think of them as spiritual atoms. Don't think of them as actual physical little balls or something like this. They can't have shape. They're not material, but that's kind of monads. He also thinks of innate ideas. Let's do number 5. 2 more here. He believes in a doctrine known as the best of all possible worlds. Let me say this to you and think about how profound this is. Do you agree? Do you disagree? What do you think of our boy Leibniz? L. How do you make an L? I don't know which direction you're going to be facing, or the camera's going to face me, rather. He believes that the world in which we live now is the best of all possible worlds that God could have created.
This is my last resort.
Now, wait a second. You say, Zach, that's absurd. That's insane. We have mosquitoes. We have cancer. We have tornadoes. We have murder. We have rape. This is the best of all possible worlds that God could have created. Voltaire mockingly writes against Leibniz in his work Candide, and he says, well, if this is the best of all possible worlds, I'd hate to see what the others look like. If this is the best one and it's pretty bad, then the other ones must be horrendous, right? Here's what Leibniz means. If God is all-powerful, and if God is all-knowing, then by default, this is the best possible world to God. You say, I don't think it's the best possible world. Think about how arrogant that is. You don't see everything. You don't see everything that's going on. If you knew what God knew, you would make the exact same world. Because what Leibniz is trying to say is, you don't get to, as a dumb human, say, I don't like mosquitoes and I get sick, therefore God doesn't know what he's doing. He's saying, no, God has a reason for all these things. God knows it by default. By default, God believes this is the best of all possible worlds. If God is all-powerful, and if he's all-wise, would he create the 286th best world that he could make? By world, he's meaning universe, everything that exists, not just Earth. Would God make the 36th best world that he could make? Or would he not make the world that gave him the most glory? Would he not make the world in which he could maximize perfection to the highest degree possible? Now, obviously, God, though, has several things that he wants to accomplish. His goal is not just to have human happiness. If that was the case, he could have created a very different kind of universe. He also wants to balance that with physical perfection. He wants a thing that has simplicity of laws and a beauty. God is using evil things for a good purpose to Leibniz, right? So for the person that says this is not the best of all possible worlds, it sucks. He's like, cool, you sound like a child who doesn't want to get a vaccine because the shot hurts, instead of realizing that the parent knows what's best and this is best for the child. So when we say it's the best of all possible worlds, we're saying if God wants to maintain things like human freedom, if God wants to maintain things of some human happiness, if God wants to have simplicity of laws and these kind of things, this is the best of all possible worlds. And the places you misperceive it are because you misperceive it. By default, if God is who you think he is or who he thinks he is, Leibniz, then this has to be the best of all possible worlds. He's balancing human happiness with simplicity of laws, meaning somebody who can write a 50-page book and say the same thing as someone who writes a 500-page book is way smarter. There's something to be said about brevity. God wants to have this beautiful world with a simplicity of laws that also maximizes human happiness. And so this is the world that you're going to get. You can maximize one of those two poles, but he wants to have both. Best of all possible worlds. Number 6, almost done. Intellectualism. There's something called the Euthyphro dilemma, which is this question. Does God, or the gods, because it's originally posed by the Greeks, does God or the gods, do they say that something is good because their intellect already sees that it's good? Or do they say that something's good because their will just decides that it's good? To say it another way, if rape is bad, which it is bad, by the way, if rape is bad and God thinks rape is bad, or the gods, and they put in whatever book of revealed religion you believe in, they put that you shouldn't rape. Is the reason that rape is wrong merely because God or the gods has said it? Is that the only thing that makes it wrong? That it just goes against God? Or is it inherently wrong? God or the gods look ahead and see, oh, rape is bad. That would be bad for humans, so I'm going to say that it's bad. That's the question. Does God think things are good because he sees that they're good with his intelligence, his intellect, or are they good merely because he declares them to be good? Leibniz will follow Aquinas in being an intellectualist. He's going to say, if God just determines what's good, then God is arbitrary. If God just says that rape is bad, that means God could have just said rape is good, and then rape would be good, and we should all be raping each other. He doesn't, by the way, Leibniz doesn't use that rape example. That sounds kind of extreme, but that's the idea. What others, guys like, Descartes, John Duns Scotus, they're going to say, nope, God gets to decide what's good and bad. It is just his will that decides it. God can't look and see that something's inherently good or bad. He made everything. He designed everything. It's not like there's this standard above God called goodness to which God has to conform. And so, anyway, that's something. The reason that's important is because for Leibniz, everything has to have a sufficient reason for why it is the way it is and not otherwise. The principle of sufficient reason. So he'll ask questions like this: why is there something rather than nothing? There's a reason for it. God wanted to create it for his glory, or something like that. Why do these laws work this way? Well, because in his mind, God is always maximizing everything that can be maximized to be the best and most perfect that it can be, considering all things considered. All things considered. You could have a world without evil, but then you also have a world without the ability to grow in character. You have a world without the ability to be forgiven and know God's mercy. You lose certain things. So, take another break. Go surf the web. No one ever says that. Go hop on Ask Jeeves or something like this. Go to what was it? Napster. Download some sweet music illegally. Whatever you want to do. Okay. Those are the big thoughts for Leibniz. There's more. He's a genius, but we got to keep this to some sort of length that is not ridiculous. Recommended works. So he's written a bajillion things. If you're like, Zach, this guy's interesting. I kind of want to know more about Leibniz. What works should I read? Let me give you just a few, okay? And most of these are pretty small. Some of them, the last two are a bit longer, but the first three are pretty small. Discourse on Metaphysics. Okay, if you read one thing on Leibniz, it should probably be that. It's very helpful. It's very clear. It's, 40 pages. It's tiny. The Monadology is like 15 pages, also very small, very helpful. Principles of Nature and Grace based on Reason, also about 10 pages. Very small summaries of his brilliant philosophy. Larger works, Theodicy, where he's trying to deal with the problem of evil and such. And then one that's very thick, you're talking 500 pages, and it's pretty rambling and dense, is New Essays on Human Understanding. So that's what you need to know Leibniz. Let's end by talking about some problems with Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz. He's brilliant. He has a system that works that's very strange. Let me mention just a few problems, okay? But first, it's time to take a little break with this. You always know if I'm recording in the morning, if I'm drinking an energy drink, or if it's any time after 10 a.m., it's alcohol. That's a joke. I'm fine. Please don't set up an intervention. Number one, he never really figured out a way to incorporate what seems to be physical with these little immaterial soul-like monads. That's a pretty big flaw. He thinks that what we think of as physical is just an appearance. It's not the reality. That's strange, though. It's hard to say that these immaterial monads make up things that appear to be physical. How do things with no extension create what we seem to perceive as extension everywhere? That's a problem for his system. His system works in theory. Does it work in practice? So that's a problem for Leibniz. His view of determinism and free will, I think, is just stupid. I think it's absolutely contradictory. What he does, if every monad has its entire history pre-programmed into it by God, it seems like there's no such thing as free will. But Leibniz wants to keep the idea of free will because he believes in moral culpability. So what does he do? He basically says the only things that are necessary are like mathematical truths, all bachelors are unmarried men, something can't both be and not be at the same time. Those things are necessary. It's not necessary that Hitler become this dictator. God could have made Hitler not do that and have a different kind of Hitler. And so because, though it's going to happen, it's built into baby Hitler, and because God already has ordained or knows that Hitler's going to be bad, it's going to happen. It's not like it's not going to happen, but he thinks that doesn't go against Hitler's free will because it's not necessary like math. I think that is him just taking his Christianity and his theology and mixing that with his philosophy instead of just being pure on his philosophy. I think he's hedging there because there are certain things he's not willing to concede to because of his theology. Okay. Right, wrong, or indifferent. I'm not saying that's right, wrong, or we all take our biases and our presuppositions and read them into our positions. I think he does that in that area, though, which doesn't allow him to give a great answer on that. That's my opinion. Someone like Spinoza would just say, yeah, we don't have free will like that, right? Our freedom is found in realizing that we're determined and embracing that. So who has a more consistent philosophical system is a different question than who's right theologically or something like that. Or maybe neither. Because again, Spinoza has a theology of seeing God as everything, nature, and so he's also reading that presupposition onto that. So anyway, philosophy's hard, read more. Okay. Number 3. His view that this is the greatest of all possible worlds doesn't work if voluntarism is true, and it doesn't work if God is considering the happiness of creatures such as humans. So let me say it another way. If God doesn't need creation, could he not have created a world where there's less suffering and still have gotten the same glory and humans still be the same amount as happy? Leibniz is saying no. Leibniz is going to say no. God, the reason God designed the world the way he did, the universe, is because his intellect, his genius, saw this is the best option. God is somewhat restricted by the different goals God has in trying to create a universe. Someone like, Descartes or even Martin Luther would say, nope, God could have made a different world with his will and it have less of these kind of bad things. I don't know if they'd say it that way, but it is where their position of voluntarism would lead. Anyway, last problem with Leibniz. He doesn't have a fully fledged view of ethics. Like Spinoza, his view of morality and ethics is really going to be birthed out of his metaphysics, birthed out of his whole theory of monads and his metaphysics and all these kind of things, substances. And so the only reason I say that is if you're going to be a renowned philosopher, which he is, again, he's a genius, you also typically want, like Aristotle had, like Kant had, like Mill had, you want a system of ethics that you can also give people as you're doing big ticket, deal with all the topics kind of philosophy. So why, to Leibniz, does a drunkard or a murderer or something, why do they do that? Is it because their will is wicked and they see that being sober is better and they just can't do it? For Leibniz, he holds a very old view, again, in Greek philosophy, that when we have a moral misstep, it's not because we're just broken. It's because we're misreasoning about what's best. The person who goes and murders somebody, to Leibniz, thinks they're wrong, but they think that is what's best. They think that will make them happier than not murdering somebody. Or their view is not vivid enough to actually affect their actions. So they think, yeah, maybe murder's bad, but they're not really paying attention enough. So he thinks that moral defects are based upon what you think is best in your knowledge, your intellect, versus just being a weakness of will. Okay. Let's summarize that. That's a lot. Geez, this is why you come to ideological, to get more smarter. What you need to know is you have a guy who's an absolute polymath and genius who comes up with a system that is unique in that every substance is technically different. In one sense, they're all the same because they're monads, but all the monads are different. And so technically every substance is different. And the way they interact is by being pre-programmed by God to follow their own path. So they're not technically interacting. They're not bumping into each other or something like that. This creates a system where, in his mind, there's a proof for God, there's a proof for the immortality of the soul, there's a proof for how substances can interact. It solves all the problems. Does it? But it solves a lot of the problems. And so it's a brilliant system. He's a brilliant thinker. Again, invents discovers differential calculus independently of Newton. He's the man. He has a weird system, though. But should we dismiss a system for being weird if it's more coherent than what he critiques of what we think of as matter? Matter makes no sense. Matter is just a group of stuff clumped together that you can divide infinitely. Well, then there's no such thing as a human or a table or whatever. There's just matter that gets divided forever. If you can divide it infinitely, there's no smallest thing. So, Leibniz, listen, if you're a single guy, take a girl on a date and just be like, hey, you know what you need? Some more Leibniz in your life. Let's talk about monads. And she's like, I like when you talk about monads because it sounds dirty. All right. Thanks for joining us, Ideological. We will see you next time.